Welcome to the Healing Collective podcast, where we explore the paradox of healing.
And we broadcast all of the healing codes to support a world of more heart-centered humans. As people are listening to you today, Jeanne, how would you want them to know you? What would you want them to know about you?
Well, I love in the CLG world that you don't answer your introduction with anything more than your first name, right? Right. And it's not about who you are related to or what you do in the world, but your true identity. So how would I want people to know me? I would want them to know my given name is Jeanne. By my parents. I was named after my grandmother. And I am on a journey to continue to live in the fullness of my true identity as a child of God, loved, whole, free, at peace, just because of that, not because of anything that I do in the world. And that is probably my deepest struggle and challenge is getting stuck in all that I do in the world and relating that to that being my being, even though it's not. So, yeah, but I do some things in the world. and I've got some people that I do that alongside of. So I am married. I've been married for 26 years, which is really crazy to me because I feel in my head like I'm 26 years old. And I have 2 kids, and our kids go to school together, Lauren. So we have a junior in high school and a freshman in high school. Elijah is our oldest and Gigi's our youngest. And my husband and I started a community of faith about 12 years ago called Soul City Church in downtown Chicago. Those are some of the things that I do and the people that I'm connected to.
Cool. And then can you just, so Bethany knows, like, I know this answer, but your orientation to CLG and like your journey there, what was that like?
Yeah. Gosh, I'm trying to remember what year it was that I started CLG. It had to be at least 6 or 7 years ago now. I'm thinking. So I was just feeling utterly burnt out and exhausted from all of that doing that I was talking about. And some friends of ours that were in a CLG forum, he had a really loving conversation with me that kind of went like this. You need some help. And I think I know who you need to connect with. And he said, my friend Jim Dethmer. And I was like, I know Jim because years ago, Jim and I used to work at a church together. In Jim's like former life when he was a pastor. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay. I know that world too, actually. But
that's so funny. And his daughter, Kate, who I knew as Katie, now she goes more clearly by Kate. Katie was in our youth ministry, and Jim at the time was separating from his wife, his first wife, Carol, and Katie was a distraught high school student whose parents were walking through a divorce.
Wow.
And I was the person that came into her life and walked with her through that divorce. And so that's how I first met Jim, was through Kate. And so fast forward the clock years and years and years later, my friend said to me, I think you need to join this group with Jim Dethmer. And what I knew him as was an old story of that's the guy that cheated on his wife and divorced her. And I helped clean up all the pieces with his daughter. So it was such an interesting moment, that my friend was like, he's the guy that can help you. And I'm like, are you sure he's the guy that can help me? And oh my gosh, him and Diana and all the work in CLG were revolutionary. And it was such a beautiful gift for me to pay attention to all my judgments. Right. So that's how I got connected to the CLG world. And I was in forum for 6 years, I maybe longer. I don't know. Then my husband, Jared, got into some forums. That's where Lauryn and him met. And you guys were learning partners for a while,
he was
right?
my first learning partner in my first forum.
I love that. I love that. So, and then Lauryn and I were in like a weird forum together. I don't know what that forum was, but that was great. Right when COVID hit. And
then and now our kids go to high school together. And
right.
We saw each other at the football game. So
it's so crazy.
It's a world. And then Jeanne, you identify as an 8 on the Enneagram. Is that right?
I do.
Does that still feel right to you? Okay.
Yes, it still feels very right to me. It's so funny when people tell me, they're like, I had this journey where I thought it was this for so long. And then I realized I was this, and I'm like, I have never not been an 8.
Right.
I identify also as an 8, although Lauryn always questions that, but pretty sure I'm an 8 also.
Yeah, I love that.
What's the assumption of the last many years here?
Mm-hmm. Bethany, what would you want Jeanne to know about you?
Well, we did get to catch up a little bit right before you got on, but so she knows I work, for CLG, and we have a lot of the same friends. And I told her how me and you met, and that we've been learning partners basically for life. I mean, the one thing that I noticed wanting to say is, even though I've, in the same world and done a bunch of the same stuff, the moment I'm in right now sounds similar to the moment you were in when someone said, you need help. I'm kind of burnt out, and I guess I'm in like a bit of a tower moment. And so my ears just perked up when you said that, and I said, yeah, like I've got a little bit of that going on currently, I guess. Lauryn obviously helps a lot with that, and has been a big support, but I guess one thing to know about me. I'm in the mess right now.
Thank you. Where do you call home? Like, where do you live?
I'm in a little beach town called Beverly. It's just north of Boston. So it's like on the Massachusetts seacoast there. Okay. It's a beautiful little town. It's right next to Salem, Massachusetts. So there's a lot of like witchy vibes and stuff like that. I grew up in and around the Boston area, and a mom. I've got 2 kids, 7 and 10, and do full-time coaching.
That's cool. Thank you.
I kind of, since people probably have been listening to the podcast, I guess I kind of want to check in at this time and space of just like, because I really traditionally have fallen apart on the podcast many times. So I feel like people who listen like are on a journey with me. And I feel like I'm having a tower moment in the other direction, where like all these obstacles are just like, I feel the best that I've ever felt. I feel like everything that I've gone through was to bring me to who I am right now. And I have so much like hope and optimism for the future. And I had this really powerful experience. I went to a ceremony on Sunday, and it was about healing your maternal lineage. And it said, the question was, what do you want to let go of, and what do you want to replace in your maternal lineage? And I asked myself, you know how you sit with your intuition, like I didn't have a cognitive answer to that. And what came in was compulsively doing to release that, and to bring in like the divine feminine, the erotic. And then what I experienced was like feeling this woman kind of like role played my mom or a mother, and just realized that my physical body couldn't feel energetically my mom's like energy and her spirit. And basically there's this like mother wound in my maternal lineage where I couldn't feel like the great mother, the power of being mother, the nurturing. And that as a result, this like compulsive doingness came in. And I could feel how like it came from this like fear that like I'm not held and nothing's going to catch me and it's all up to me. But I could feel how far back it went into the lineage. And since that happened, I've had a couple of just like really strong breakthroughs, just even in my own feminine energy, like feeling so much more balanced. And so I am excited about that. And it was just like really transformative to see the power of multiple generations of, you know, maybe like traumatized mothers, like mothers whose bodies were in trauma, you know. And I imagine like when they're literally having the baby, they're drugged and they're, you know, there's all these things that could contribute to multiple generations of babies not feeling their mother. So that's where I am in time and space right now.
Thank you.
That's like a more familiar place to me, like optimistic, feeling like I've learned so much stuff and I'm on purpose, and I am like in hell. Like my body is just breaking down and will not get better. Like I'm exhausted, like such deep levels of exhaustion. Like, remember the first time you stayed up all night when you were like in middle school or something and you like couldn't keep your eyes open? I feel that way after 9 hours of sleep every night. Like and I just broke up. We ended a relationship. My boyfriend and I broke up, and my mom is sick. And there's just like, my kids are sick. My kid has an ulcer. Like he can't get well. And I have just sort of like, it's like the other side of the polarity on that optimism. It's like a real dark kind of, I guess, almost depressed kind of place. That's kind of brand new for me. Like it would pop up for like a day or so here or there, but yeah, it's a totally different. Lauryn and I are always doing the same stuff, but at different times. So I'm over here doing something totally different programming happening over here right now.
I was with a group last night, the board that helps us in our organization, and somebody did like a reading at the start of the dinner, and I jotted down one of the things that she said in the reading. It's that disruption is God's greatest classroom. And I like jotted it down, and I was like, yeah, why don't I ever sign up for that class? You know, like, because I know that to be true in the long story of my life, that the disruptions are actually invitations, right? They're like a calling. They're like a lights on off in the distance, and it's like, go towards that, right? And there's this part of me that like knows it so intuitively in my body, and yet the other part of me just so wants to run from the disruption. And so I can identify, Bethany, with the ways that life feels like it's being disrupted right now.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly like filling in some gaps. And I think, I can, there's part of me that can hold everything that's happening. And it's like, I think most of the time I'm subscribing to a story that I didn't sign up for this right now. And why the fuck is this happening? But I can also see that I'm engaging in like the deepest work of my life and being more vulnerable than ever. And like, doing deep somatic work and all this nervous system trauma work. Like I became an SCP, like a certified somatic experience practitioner, and did all this like super intensives this year that were really disruptive. And I'm doing all this fascia work and this trauma stored in the fascia. And I've got like these 2 people stretching me once a week. And I'm like, maybe I did sign up. Like I have some astrology happening, and I'm like, okay, yeah, like, I guess this is just what's supposed to be happening right now. But it does help me, and like my spiritual friends and my conscious friends are kind of like, giving me perspectives like that, like, on the other side of it, and you're going to learn. And I'm like, I know all that. And it's like a new level.
It doesn't matter when you're in it.
It never matters when you're in it. When you're in it, that's all you see.
Yeah. Well, and it's good. I mean, I have a lot of people in my life who have gone through really depressive episodes and never really got me being like, not really like that, not having a lot of that experience. And so there is something that feels connective about it a little bit too. Like I feel like I'm understanding something that I haven't before. as long as Lauren keeps texting me every day, I think I'll be okay. So.
Jeannie, I'm thinking about what you said about disruption, and I'm thinking about what you said about wanting to be like it sounds like your intention and where you hold yourself is to become a whole child of God. You said a few other words, and if I'm not saying it the way that resonates with you, let me know. But just what we like to where we like to start is kind of how we did right here's where we are. But like, what has been your initiatory journey of healing? So to become and be the person you are right now, what have you had to heal? What do you feel like? Yeah, I'll just stop there.
Yeah. Yeah. So much. So much. I think what it comes to my mind is even something you just said, Lauren, the compulsion to do that like ongoing craving and need to like a really simple way of describing it is checking boxes, right? Like productivity, being a productive vessel, that things come through and good things come through and positive things come through. And that sense of what if all that came through me was just love into the world? Is that enough? And so I would say some of my deepest healing work has been around, for years, choosing productivity over intimacy. And then how that spins out in my relationships too. How is our marriage productive in the world versus are we intimate allies and connectors with one another? How am I being productive in raising my children, right? Or do they feel this sense of just deep connectedness to me? What do I do for them versus who am I with them? So that has just been such an ongoing healing journey for me. Because in productivity, I get a lot of good hits. I get the hit.
Well, you're really good at it and your outcomes are beautiful. I can attest to just a few that I've witnessed, like it would be hard not to be like, yeah, I'm good at this and I like it and I get positive reinforcement.
Right. All of that. So I think that's been some of my ongoing deep healing journey. And so much of that has been learning how to be in the present moment with what is, right? And just being loved and letting love flow through my life and not having to do anything for that love, but to receive it. And so, yeah, I would say some of my most significant healing journey is really related to productivity, and it's related to presence. And because I am really good at not being present.
What does that look like when you're not present, like in your life? What does that look like?
Yeah. It's either rehashing the past or rehearsing the future, right? It's trying to change somehow what was, or trying to control all the what ifs, and so it's reaching back to something that literally cannot be changed per se, but believing that I can change something, right, that has already occurred, or going out into the future and trying to control. And as an 8 on the Enneagram, I mean, that's perhaps one of my most central vices is control and power. And, trying to like wrap my fingers around something and make it be a certain way. And the power of living in the present moment is consenting to what is. It's that consenting to reality, and consenting feels like there's no action to it. And yet it feels like it's the hardest thing to do. It requires so much actually of us to consent to reality, to consent to what is, to allow ourselves to be open to the present moment and to what is occurring, and not changing or controlling, but just choosing to be.
I mean, as the other 8 in the room, the productivity thing resonates a lot. And like, I can feel that I'll do a thing of like, but intimacy is productive and spending time is productive. Like, but I actually sometimes have to wrap it in that almost, and have it feel like it comes naturally. I mean, I think I've even said, forget if it was on the podcast or just to Lauryn recently, but like, one of the things that slows me down is like a romantic partnership, because I'm doing something like it's productive to me to like build intimacy with a partner that way. And then I can just rest because I'm still doing because I'm resting with somebody. I've been doing all kinds of little games and things with myself around my relationship to productivity.
Yeah. And it's interesting to me. I'm a deep lover of the scriptures, and I think Jesus said something like, what good will it be for you to gain the whole world and lose your soul? Or yet forfeit your soul is how he says it, right? And it's so interesting to me because I feel like that capacity to gain the whole world is that productivity for me. Like, what can I gain? What can I do? What can I get done? That hamster wheel kind of thing. And it's such a game because you think you're gaining something, right? You're achieving something, you're pushing something, you're advancing something. There's things coming into the world through it. But if it's at the cost and the forfeit of your soul, you're actually losing everything. And so to go back to your question, Lauryn, I mean, that has been my ongoing healing journey, is the healing of my soul, the restoring of my soul. And, first half of my life, I thought that was done through productivity. I thought that was done through efforting. I thought that was done through like powering through. And I'm realizing maybe this is the gift of age. It's the gift of life lived, is that I'm realizing it's in the release. It's in the letting go. It's in the surrender that actually happens.
Yeah.
All things that I did not pursue in the first half of my life.
I thought it was so interesting that you said consent to what, life, because my experience is very, very similar. Like, is that there was all these initiations and deep, painful experiences to basically bring me to my knees to say, like, I consent to the reality. But for me, it's that surrender. Like, I'm at my knees, I'm at my, for instance, at one point it was a 12-step program. Like, I'm literally powerless, I cannot control my reality. I can't pretend I'm controlling it anymore. I just have to be with what's happening. Yeah. But this word of consent, I'm laughing because I'm like, an 8 would say consent, because an 8 would say, I gave you permission. I gave you permission to bring me to my knees, right?
Yes.
In my world, it's like, you destroyed me to my knees. I had no choice. But I'm curious, like, who is your soul? Like, I just want to say one little story. Like, I think it was your book signing. And my mom, it was when my mom was there. And remember, she wanted to get the book signed. My mom's a big Jeanne fan. I am too, but
your mom is so sweet.
A little next level. And I just remember, Jeannie, like, I think that was kind of like the closest moment you hugged me or something. And I could literally see this like sparkle in your eye, and I felt your soul identity. And that is something that I feel like is something that I do feel in people. And it was really, really beautiful moment that is really palpable to me. And I'm just curious what you've learned about your own soul. Like, who is she? What is she like?
Thank you for sharing that. I love that you felt that. You know, I will answer your question about my soul, but I think part of what was connected to that, Lauren, is you mentioned the book signing, and you know, I feel like it was such a movement of surrender for me to write a book about being present, because if I were to write a book in the world, it'd be like how to lasso the world, right? How to get everything that you want out of the world, how to make it all happen, right? And so that was such a consenting process for me of writing about, and I often say that book wrote me.
I was about to say, did you feel like, did it feel to you like God was talking to you?
Oh yeah. That book wrote me more than I wrote that book, because I wrote what I most needed. I did not write a book as an expert in how to be present. I wrote a book in, this has been my journey of surrender over and over and over again. And I think some of what I'm realizing, and so to even get to your question of the soul is this beautiful space where it's constantly surrendering, and it's surrendering with love. It's surrendering with joy. It's surrendering with hope. It's surrendering because it knows this is the safest way to live, is to be encapsulated by the love of God, and to not have to do or prove or be anything other than a child of God, you know, just utterly and completely loved. So for me, that is, when I think about my soul, I think about the first words, like when I pause and I breathe and I think about my soul, I think loved, whole, free, connected. And you know, none of those words are like action words on my part, right? They're receiving words.
Receptive words.
Yeah. And it's consenting to that. Yeah. And I think that, I imagine you two would say the same thing. Like when I show up in my relationships with that posture, the people in my world are just receive me so differently, versus when I show up controlling, you know, forcing, pushing, challenging. And those are part, like Bethany, you know, we're known as the challenger, right? Literally the term for the 8. And so it's like, how do we do what we're born to do, to challenge, to speak to what is broken, to call forth what you know is dark, and hopefully call it into light, what is maybe wrong, and how to right those things in the world. How do you do that from a posture of love? I think that's been so much of my journey as well, because for so long it's like the first term that I heard about being an 8 was that our need is to be against something. I was like, oh yeah, I know exactly what that feels like. And when I show up in my relationships with that energy, not from a place of love, there isn't that connection. There's separateness. There's more division. There's more having to, there's a lot of working hard versus relaxing, consenting.
Or flow. Yeah.
Flow. Yeah. A much better term.
I noticed kind of wanting to tell you a little bit about what's been happening for me professionally, because it just smacks of a lot of the things you're pointing to. But so I did environmental work for a really long time. So it's kind of like classic 8 shit, saving the world. And like I worked for like a natural foods company, and we worked in agriculture, and it was about regenerative agriculture and like drawing down carbon, and absolutely was against something, against like, chemical agriculture and industrial agriculture, and like even companies who were standing for that kind of thing. I literally was like doing debates at industry conferences. Like that was a big part of how I got my start, and like creating working groups. And also I'm like a social subtype, so it is about the whole, and I'm like bringing a lot of people along and all of that. And I remember years ago we were doing like a facilitation training. We were in Chicago actually, and Deb Katz, one of the other coaches on the team, what we were talking about, like activism from above the line. And she was like, Bethany, until you can see the last white rhino dying as love, you're below the line. Like, she's just like, you're scared. I one of the main ways I go below the line about climate change is mostly like not being willing to feel all my feelings, like my heartbreak, basically, and my fear about a dying planet and what those implications might be in the future. But that's where I feel myself, like what you're saying, like pushing against things in the future and stuff.
Yeah.
And I did create a bunch of stuff, and I moved a bunch of things along. And
wait, let me just add one thing. So when she left this job, Jeannie, I think you'll appreciate this. She was honored as the soul of the industry. Like got an award, like soul of the industry.
The soul of the industry.
But the paradox, right? Like you're giving your soul to an industry versus have an intimacy with your soul, your own soul,
Right.
Well, it's just like I've been coaching, doing this work, aware that I'm largely doing this from below the line, and that we're in this like collective pop about how to even address collective issues that are on a mass scale, and to not be fighting against something where there's injustice and all the 8 stuff, right? Yeah. And so I'm tracking all along, and like, knowing that a lot of the things I'm doing probably really from a place of fear inside of myself and pushing against. And at some point, it's like I exhausted my inner activist, and I like maybe had been taking on more than my responsibility for so long. Yeah. Because I just didn't know what else to do. And it's like, fine, do it from below the line. Like if you don't know how to, it's just where I was in my evolution, and I still am. But in leaving that job finally all the way, it's like I kind of had to face that, like the whole thing wasn't going to fall apart if I left. And like actually the whole movement's gonna keep going along, and it's not really about me and how much me there was in the doing. And so I feel like I'm in this big overcorrection where I'm kind of like, maybe we're not supposed to save the species. Die. Maybe that's how things get back in balance. And can I let go of trying to control all of that? And there is some freedom and some relief, honestly, in trying to change the outcome of literally the survival of the species and the planet, because that's what I was spending a lot of my day to day on, like trying to control for or influence. But on the other side of that, it feels good to lay that all down a little bit. The other side of it is like, doesn't matter what I do. And there's like this nihilism and this like nothing means anything, that where I made so much meaning of the work I was doing. And it was like super aligned, and it was zone of genius a lot of ways. And I was turned on by the whole thing, and like, it was great. But I think, like it's the whole thing's going to do whatever it's doing, no matter what I'm doing. And really facing that is actually a big part of like, it's an identity crisis. Yeah. And I'm over here, like in this other place of like, maybe it doesn't fucking matter a single thing I do. And that's a lot of where I feel sort of the depression. Maybe it's all the repressed sadness that's just here now that I'm more willing to feel now. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I so appreciate that. And thank you for letting me see that part that I can so quickly resonate with is the part of really wanting to feed the part of my ego that needs to be against, that needs to fight for something, that needs to fix something, the need that all these things that are happening to us, and the turn in that, right, of, but what if all these things are happening for us? And choosing to look at it through a different lens, choosing to hold it loosely. I'm really good at holding things tightly and needing them to work out just the way that my mind has imagined them needing to work out. And, this comes back to surrender too, right? The unfurling of the fingers. And that is so much of, I imagine it shows up in every one of the Enneagram numbers, in some way, shape, or form, because it's human tendency to want things to be the way we want them to be. And so there's surrender is, to me, it's a meta theme, not just an 8 theme. I imagine, Lauryn, you equally identify with it, right? But it's so interesting because when I can surrender and when I can release, when I can hold it loosely, I can really have that consenting posture that we were talking about, and that surrendering posture of actually having gratitude for what is. Like,
well, and
yeah.
I want to bring something else into the conversation, because I feel like 2 different things, even energetically, and what I heard you are like from Jeanne, than where you are, Bethany. And, in the Enneagram work, we hear, like, when you go deep into it, the integration is into your essence, right? And everyone has an essence. Gay and Katie Hendricks, they talk about this essence. So, like, for the sake of this podcast, let's just call the essence like the soul identity. And I feel that as an energy that fills, like, actually fills the body. I think it's also the thing that we see leave the body, right, when we die. And so when I feel into you, Bethany, it feels like, well, let me say this. Enneagram is a personality structure. It's a blueprint that I think is more like cognitive. It's like a cognitive blueprint to see the world. Right. And so when I feel into what Bethany's saying, it's like her cognitive blueprint is kind of like blowing up, and her mind can only imagine that the opposite, like, let's just go to the opposite. Right. What I am feeling in you, Jeanne, and actually it's like a contrast experience. Like, I am kind of mapping energetically when we were in circle together, when your book came out, even when I saw you at the football game, to now, like, each time that I felt you, it feels like that the essence is more fully forward and like filling up your being. And so I can like feel your beingness. And so I just want to say that, because wholeness, like the experience of wholeness and who we are. And I think the Enneagram, this is what I think gets lost in the Enneagram work, is like the truth of who a 4 is creativity, right? Like, the essence of an 8 is truth. Like, that is the expression that we're here to embody, but we spend all this time and put all this attention on kind of the trauma response of the blueprint, rather than what is it like and feel like, and to truly be in my essence. And that, I think, in every Enneagram type, like, surrender is required, right? Yeah. To take us from leaning on the personality structure to allowing our essence to come forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's so interesting, because I would say the more I lean into that and have, so much of the beautiful work of CLG is paying attention to what you're paying attention to, right? It's like, where is our attention going, and learning how to listen to that and then come back to the present moment. And we do that in all kinds of different practices, which is the gift of so much of what CLG has been for me. But gosh, I spent and spend, present tense, so much energy in the mode of fixing or writing things or trying to reestablish what was broken and making it right. And it's so interesting to me that when I choose a different energy and I choose the energy of surrender, I choose the energy of wholeness, I choose what happens when I just allow myself to be in the present moment and see what comes forth from that and trust that it is good. It is good. Whatever it is. Wow, that is like, that is powerful surrender to me. Because I spent decades, I think, in a belief construct that ultimately it wasn't good. And I needed to make things good. I needed to participate in it and not trusting that goodness will unfold as I surrender to all that God is doing in my life and the lives of others. And so yeah, it's been such a journey to be a recovering producer in the world. I am very much actively doing that. I feel like I'm like baby steps into what it is like to be a recovering addict to productivity.
When I think about what's coming up is that, you and Bethany, I know, have both had like really traumatic deaths of people that you're really close to. And I just think about the ways that surrender becomes unsafe, right? Like it's like death is like the ultimate, like I can't control this, right? And then we kind of map that as like, if that's what life does or God or, however we define it, if that's what it does to me, why would I think that what is offered is benevolent or for me? And that's such a journey of the human experience to say, are you willing to find out if it is? And are you willing to keep stepping into the unknown and stop controlling everything? Because that's the only way you'll know either way. Yeah. But you can't know until you do it. You step out into that unknown space.
And you have to regularly invite the question, how is this for me? And, versus why did this happen to me? Which is very victim conscious construct. And so really shifting that of how is this for me has been so fundamental in opening me up to more love, more freedom, more wholeness, more grace. I
think for me, like I also agree with that question. Like there's just something in my soul that knows like life is for you. So then I would just get so much kind of like cognitive dissonance. Like if that's what's true, why is this happening? And one of the things I've really had to surrender to is, what I know as love is coordinating the highest and best for all. And a lot of the times that I get in victim consciousness about what is happening in my life is because I'm only looking at it from my, individual wants and needs and expectations. Yeah. And when I look back on things that I was like, why life, I literally had thoughts like life must hate me if these things would happen to me. And I look back and I see, oh, you were supporting all of the people involved to reach higher, to be called deeper, to get into right relationship. And the outcome of that is not necessarily what I hoped, would happen. But I'm getting to live a more abundant existence, a more whole existence as a result of that occurring. And that's just been a real mindset shift for me around something being for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's so funny because, whenever we experience suffering, I often am reminded that suffering it usually comes because of the avoidance of pain, right? There's something painful that I'm trying to avoid, and that's causing more suffering. And it's especially hard when you see it happening to the people that you love and that you just adore, and Lauryn, we mentioned our kids go to the same school, and, we moved in the middle of the pandemic. Our son the pandemic hit when he was in 8th grade, and, in Chicago, the whole school system and applying to Chicago high schools and all of that just was crazy town in the middle of the pandemic. And so we made this really big, what felt like a really big decision to move right outside of the city, and to get into a different school district. And so that would mean that he would go to a school where, he didn't know anybody. It was the middle of the pandemic. You're doing school on, Zoom squares like this, little rectangles, right? And that's how you're meeting people, and you're trying to figure out high school. And I think for a good 12 months, Jarrett and I constantly had this conversation. Did we do the right thing? Did we make the right decision? Because we saw how much it was painful for Elijah. It was a hard move. He had to make all new friends in a new school, and the pandemic was going on. And it was a big adjustment in his life. And I kept coming from the mindset of, have we done the right thing to him? Versus the posture of, how is God going to use this for him? Like, what is going to come through him in his life through this decision? And how is this going to actually be of service to the whole of his story? Fast forward the clock, and they have this thing at the high school where you can be in this leadership program, and it's for juniors and seniors. And his sophomore year, he applied, and they don't accept many juniors. And he applied, and he had to write an essay. And the essay that he wrote was about how much he learned in having to let go and move to this new school and meet new people, and how hard it was to feel loneliness and to work through that loneliness, to come out of his comfort zone. And he shows me this essay after he writes it. And I'm like, I was fighting this for a whole year. Like, I was literally running around the drama triangle thinking, how do I hero my son? I've made these terrible decisions, and he has no friends, and he's had to restart all of these things. Right. And I'm thinking, I've done this thing to him. And I read this essay, and I'm like, oh my gosh, all of this has been for his good. Like, he has a lens now in this leadership program, and he was accepted into the program. He has a lens for the new kid. He has a lens for the person that's on the outside. He has a lens. And it's like, I see this beautiful gift that actually got developed in him, and it had to go through some suffering. And I wanted him to have to avoid all of that suffering. I didn't want him to feel any of that pain. I didn't want anything to be bad, hard, difficult. And I see all that's come forward for him, right? Now, I just told that in a 4-minute story on a podcast. It was hell living through it, watching my child, who I love, struggle. But it's such a picture to me of how God is for us. Like, how if we consent to what is, how much good comes forth. But when we fight that, that's when suffering occurs. When we fight the pain, that's when suffering occurs. And I was realizing, oh my gosh, Jeannie, you brought so much more pain on yourself as you were fighting this decision instead of consenting to it.
Yeah.
So,
Like when life is like, I'm going left and you're like, no, I want to go right and I'm going to fight to go right. And I'm going to keep pulling. Like I am the queen of that. Like,
oh yeah.
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 Well, now I think of you as a healer. I don't know if you think of yourself that way. And our podcast is about, collective healing. We talk about the paradox of healing. Everyone's healed. No one needs to, or everyone needs healing. No one needs to heal. Kind of a little bit of what we've touched on, but how do you think what you've been through is positioning you kind of as you look forward to bring healing to the world? In your world, maybe specifically.
Yeah, I think what's coming forward for me, a sweet friend of mine, Christy, she was just telling me about a dear friend of hers who was struggling with some significant migraines and they weren't going away. She went in to the doctor. Doctor said, I think we need to do some more tests. They scanned her brain, found an inoperable tumor. And 2 weeks later, she passed. It was that significant of a tumor. And she's a 44-year-old woman, has 3 kids. No part of her thought that this was the trajectory of her life and her story. Her family, I'm sure, did not think this was the trajectory of her story. Her name is Nancy. I've never met her. But when Christy told me this story, I instantly thought of healing. And I instantly thought, was she healed? But just not healed in the way any of us wanted her to be healed. And so when you ask me the question around what does healing look like and how do I participate in that healing? I am growing in my understanding and my trusting that healing is also connected to being a witness and holding space and consenting to what is in others' lives just as much as it is consenting to what is in my life. And I tell that story about Nancy and her fast, like diagnosis to death in a matter of weeks. And I think everything in me doesn't want to consent to that. That is right. That feels wrong. That feels like so much pain and so much loss and so much heartache. And it's all of those things. And could it also be healing too? And some of what you all talk about so beautifully, is that we're all healers and we're all already healed. It's that blowing up of those polarities, right? And I will admit that my feeble mind and my constructs want to say, but no, there needed to be a healing here, right? How is that right? And yet, if I really am willing to surrender to that all of life is for us, that God is for us, that even that passing, that's healing. I feel like I just brought all the wide, deep existential questions onto the podcast. So we don't have to go there, but it was just front of mind for me because my friend Christy just told me about Nancy's passing this morning. And I just, as I was meditating and praying and thinking this morning, I was thinking, God, is that healing? And I think it is. It's just not the healing that her family wanted, right? That her children wanted, that her dearest friends wanted. But how might this even be healing in their life? So I go back to
change your kind of, do you think that perspective on healing changes the way you pastor or the way you lead a church?
It does, because I love praying with people, and I love holding space and welcoming people to surrender to what God is doing in their life, and I love asking God to do things, right? I don't think it stops the activity of asking, but I think my asking is that constant, and we can even go back to the scriptures and what Jesus even taught, right? And he said, your will be done. And gosh, do I show up in this world not praying that way? I show up in this world so often saying, my will be done, my will be done, my will be done. Even when Christy told me first about her friend Nancy, I was like, well, clearly the best outcome here is for her to be healed and for this tumor to be gone and for her body to be restored and for her to have many years with her husband and her children and to live a life this way. But I can't see it all, right? I can't know it all. And so what if her healing was connected to her passing?
Well,
It just, yeah.
it's just like the white rhino. Can we experience that as love? The last white rhino died. And can we, like, maybe we do have a certain amount of time here, and then we're not going to be here in these physical bodies anymore. And can we experience that as love and trust that too? Reminds me of the work of Byron Katie. And I think you kind of need a certain amount of trust built to even have those conversations and try on, those kind of ideas.
And when I am holding space and pastoring and shepherding, and I actually love that term shepherding because it's just kind of guiding someone to where they most want to go, to green pastures, right? That's the picture of a shepherd with a sheep. It's just taking someone to a place where there's nutritious food to
rest
and to be at peace. And so much of it is, and this is why I am particularly fond of Jesus, because he asked way more questions than he gave answers. I think he answered 3 questions in all of Scripture. He was willing to live curious. He was willing to invite people into curiosity. It's why I'm so enamored by Jesus. And because it is constantly asking, how might this be for me? How might this thing that I do not want to happen actually be for me, for my good, for more love in the world, for more wholeness, for more hope, for more peace? And gosh, that kind of pastoring is the pastoring that I love doing, because it welcomes somebody into their own spiritual journey with God versus a pastor that just gives answers, because I don't have the answers, right? I trust that God is at work inside of every person.
And this might be an assumption, but my attention keeps going to Nancy finding out she had 2 weeks to live, or maybe not even knowing, but knowing it was short. And just thinking, like, in that state of being, the last thing I imagine I would think about is being productive.
Right.
Or my job in the world. I would be like, how can I spend every waking moment breathing in the smell of my son and cuddling my dogs and making, there's just like this way that I think situations like that do shock us into like, you are not here to be human doings. You're here to be human beings.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that you pulled it back to where we started with productivity, because that's exactly right. You know, if I were given that same diagnosis, I think I absolutely would not be about making my lists and my little boxes. I would be about, how do I wring out as much love and grace and peace and presence with the people that I love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd take the kids to Disney.
Right. Yeah. And I feel like relationship is kind of like the litmus test of all of our transformation, right? It's how do the people that we do this thing called life with, how do they experience our inner work and our inner healing and our inner wholeness?
And do they stick around?
Yeah. Yeah. Because can they taste the good fruit of me moving from a life where I viewed everything through the lens of, why is this happening to me, to surrendering to, how is this happening for me? Do they get to see that shift in me? Do they get to experience it? Do they feel a different quality of my wholeness and my presence when I'm with them? Do they know that I'm really with them? Or is mom just, off in her brain, making more lists, trying to get things done, being productive? Does she just see me as another vehicle to her productivity in this world? Does she really have relationship with me?
Yeah. We usually kind of end, or when we come to the end of the podcast, we ask a pretty big question. And it's just like, what do you believe is necessary for collective healing? Mm-hmm. Like, if you could put one stake in the ground, or kind of put all your eggs in one basket, where do you think you'd put it?
Yeah, the first place that I went to is where we've been all over in this conversation today: surrender. Just surrendering to God, surrendering to ourselves in this present moment, and surrendering to one another. There's nothing like it's like the most intimate, authentic, vulnerable, like, essence of a person when they're fully surrendered. We've all talked about our kids here, right? And I think about, I've had many moments of surrender in my life, but I will say, the moment of giving birth to both of my children was quite a moment of surrender, right? It was like, here is human life coming through me. And if I tense and clench, it will not come forth. It is a utter act of surrender for life to come through me.
And ecstatic, like, the birthing process, when you surrender to your body and the process. And
it's such a letting go and trust. There's so much trust. And so when you ask me about what do we all need for collective healing, I just picture, what if every human really let go and surrendered to love? There would be so much healing. It would just be compounded healing over and over and over and over again. Because we would be interacting with that most innocent, vulnerable, authentic person, right? Like, if I see that part of you, Lauren, if I see that part of you, Bethany, if you see that part of me that innocent, authentic, vulnerable person. Gosh, I don't think I've ever seen an authentic, vulnerable, innocent person that I haven't wanted my reaction to them to be love. Like when I see somebody in their essence and that innocence, like the fullness of their beingness, the thing that comes out of me is like love. Like, I just love you, right? And I
want to
imagine,
receive you. Yeah.
yeah, I
receive
just
you.
imagine if we were all offering that to one another because we're surrendering.
I love
Yeah.
that answer. Actually,
Yeah.
I don't think we've ever heard anything like that as an answer. And this is a little. It feels important to say it like this, but my experience of God in my body is changing. What I know to be God, and it has this really balanced, and like most of my life, God was a very masculine energy. And I'm experiencing it in my body as like maybe 70-30 feminine to masculine. And I have this intention around, like, I keep getting the message, like, life is supposed to be ecstatic. Life is supposed to be orgasmic. And I'm doing like this breathwork practice. And for me to pull like the energy of ecstasy through my body, I have to surrender in my body. And I think I've surrendered in my consciousness, I guess, or I've surrendered ideas. But I don't think that I have had a lot of felt somatic experiences of surrender in my body, except maybe sleep, And I didn't have the kind of birthing experience that I know some women have where they feel that in birth. And so there's just something to me like really powerful about your metaphor with birthing, but also like the difference between telling yourself you surrender or letting go cognitively, but also what it feels like in a body to fully surrender and give over to life. And that this, what I'm making up or what I'm kind of dancing with is that it's supposed to be ecstatic as a result of that surrender.
Yeah. And I just think about the body being the container of the body, right? Really being held in love.
Right.
When you say that, what is a body fully surrendered? What does it feel like? It feels held in love.
Like a bubble of love around it.
Right. Yeah. And, and I have felt that in ecstatic, exciting, exhilarating moments. And, you mentioned that I've had some very sudden death in my life. Both my father and my brother were very traumatic losses. And I remember, the shock of both of their losses. And when it kind of rushed through me and my body really gave in to what had happened in that sobbing and that grief and that overwhelmedness, I felt very held as well in my body. Wow. And so I believe that it's on both sides. It's in the delight and the awe of life, and it's in the gravity of loss and pain and death, where our body can really feel held when we surrender to what is.
I love that. I think it's really important. And when I had that ceremony I talked about at the beginning, basically one of my awareness was like, oh, I am surrounded by love and this nurturing kind of mother energy all the time, but I was not perceiving it. And it was like a light switch went on and I could perceive it. I could like perceive the way that I'm held in love. And it's like my body did have a totally different response to life to feel that. It was like, oh, I'm good,
Yeah.
I'm just kind of saturating in the all the invitations of this conversation today. Is there anything that feels complete? I mean, incomplete, or anything else that wants to be known?
The only thing that is coming up for me is that all of this work is done in the power of the present moment. That it can be done right here, right now. No place else to be, right? That this I have a favorite Richard Rohr quote that says, "We cannot attain the presence of God because we are already in the presence of God." And I think so much of this journey, oftentimes we get perplexed with attaining things, getting things, fixing things, doing things, going back to that productivity. And I'm just reminded that the gift is always right here in the present moment.
And the thought I'm having is like, I'm just going back to the work that we all trained in together, is that there are tools and practices and ways to shift out of, like, the present moment is always here. And we have some tools and some things to support us to get back into that present moment.
Yeah.
When we leave it to go to whatever place. Yeah. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and for such a rich and nourishing conversation. I feel like the sheep that got to go to the green pastures. So thank you.
Yeah, I love doing this. They're always like right on time, like the guests and the message, and for all of us. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing.
Oh gosh, it was so delightful. So fun to just talk with you guys. I wish we were all in the same actual physical
right.
room.
That would be fun.
Someday.
It's so nice to meet you, Bethany.
Yeah, you too, Jeannie. I'm very potent for what's happening for me these days. Yeah, as Lauren said, right on time.
Yeah, same.
Right. Well, thank you so much. We'll send you the recording and you can just let us know if there's anything. Okay. All right. Bye.
Sounds
everyone.
good.
Thank you.
All right. Love you all.
Love you. Bye.
Thanks for listening. We welcome your feedback. You can email us at healingcollectivepod@gmail.com. Our website is thehealingcollectivepodcast.com, @healingpodcast on Twitter, @healingcollectivepodcast on Instagram. Special thanks to Ethan Luck, who produces. You can find him @EthanLuck on all platforms.